I installed one small app on my phone, and within 3 minutes, it showed me something that made my stomach drop. Thousands of trackers. Not on some random stranger's phone somewhere far away, in a story that always felt distant. On mine, right here. Hidden inside apps I open every single day. Apps I trusted, apps I never once questioned. And the worst part? None of this ever showed up on a permission screen. Nobody warned me. Nobody asked. It was just sitting there, quietly running in the background the entire time, and I had absolutely no idea. Here's the thing most people don't realize. When you install an app and it asks for permission to use your camera, your location, your microphone, you assume that's the full picture. You assume that little pop-up is telling you everything the app can do. It isn't. Buried inside the code of countless apps are tiny pieces of software called trackers, and they don't need your permission to exist. They just need the app itself to be installed. Once that happens, they quietly collect information about you, package it up, and send it off to companies you've probably never heard of. Think about that for a second. The permission screen you glance at for 2 seconds before tapping allow was never actually the full agreement. It was the visible part, the part designed to satisfy you just enough that you'd stop asking questions. Meanwhile, underneath that surface, an entirely separate system was operating the whole time. One you were never shown, one you never consented to in any meaningful way, because you never even knew it was there to consent to. That gap between what you're shown and what's actually happening is exactly where this story lives. I want to be upfront about something before we go any further, because I think honesty matters more than shock value here. I'm not here to tell you every app is secretly evil, or that your phone is some kind of spy device controlled by a shadowy villain. That's not accurate, and frankly, it's not necessary to make this story land. The truth is quieter than that, and in some ways, more unsettling, because it's not a conspiracy. It's an entire industry operating in plain sight, just outside the range of what most of us ever bother to look at. So I decided to actually see it for myself. I found a free open source tool built specifically to expose this. It's called Exodus Privacy, and it's maintained by a French nonprofit, a group of people who describe themselves as hacktivists trying to protect privacy everywhere. No corporate backing, no hidden agenda, just code that anyone can inspect line by line because it's fully open source. That alone made me trust it more than almost anything else on my phone. The way it works is deceptively simple. Exodus maintains a public database of known tracker signatures, essentially digital fingerprints tied to specific tracking and advertising libraries that companies bake into their apps. When you run a scan, it checks every single app installed on your device against that massive database and tells you exactly what it finds. No guesswork, no vague warnings. Real evidence pulled directly from the code sitting on your phone right now. I had roughly 100 apps installed. The scan took about 3 minutes, and when it finished, I wasn't ready for what I saw. App after app, lit up with tracker after tracker. You can sort everything by number of trackers, by number of permissions, even by how recently the app was installed, and I promise you, sorting by tracker count is where the real shock happens. One case in particular stopped me cold. A popular Android launcher, the kind of app millions of people use just to organize their home screen, had been quietly acquired by a new company. And after that acquisition, newer versions of the app started shipping with additional trackers that simply weren't there before. Same app, same icon, same name you recognized and trusted for years. But under new ownership, it was collecting more about you than it ever had. And there was no big announcement, no warning banner, nothing. You'd only know if you went digging the way I did. And it doesn't stop with big name apps either. That's what makes this genuinely unsettling. Someone using this exact same tool found a small local bike rental app, the kind of niche, practical app you'd install just to unlock a bicycle in your own city. Nothing flashy, nothing that screams data goldmine. But when they opened it up inside the scanner, it revealed 5 separate trackers. Baked into that one small app: ad tracking, analytics, a mapping and location library, a behavioral profiling tool that quietly studies patterns in how you use the app over time, and a crash reporting tool which sounds harmless but still funnels data off your device to a third party. 5 trackers, and an app whose entire job was supposed to be unlocking a bike. Now, to be fair, not every tracker is some evil surveillance tool. Some are relatively benign, crash reporters that just help developers fix bugs, analytics tools that measure how many people tap a button. But here's the problem. You don't get to choose. You don't get a menu where you pick yes to bug fixing, no to selling my behavior to advertisers. It's all bundled together and it's on by default, and most of us never even knew it existed until we saw the raw list staring back at us. And here's something else worth sitting with. Exodus doesn't catch everything. It's honest about that limitation, which is part of why I trust it. There are apps built locally, apps made by device manufacturers, apps compiled in unusual ways, and those can slip past the database entirely, leaving blind spots on your scan. So the number of trackers you see after scan isn't necessarily the ceiling. In a lot of cases, it's closer to the floor. That's exactly why people who take this seriously end up pairing Exodus with a second tool, something that watches actual live behavior instead of just scanning static code, to fill in those gaps. Once I saw this, I couldn't unsee it, so I kept going. I wanted to know not just which apps had trackers baked into their code, but what was actually happening live, in real time, as I used my phone throughout the day. That's when I found a second tool, one built for exactly that purpose. It's called Tracker Control. And unlike Exodus, which scans app code sitting still on your device, Tracker Control watches your actual network traffic as it happens. Here's how it pulls that off, and it's honestly clever. Android only allows a device to run one VPN connection at a time, and Tracker Control uses that system cleverly, in a way I didn't expect. It creates a local VPN, meaning nothing actually leaves your phone through some external server. Instead, it uses that local connection to intercept and analyze the traffic your other apps are quietly sending out, right there on your own device. Nothing gets uploaded anywhere. It all stays local. Once it's active, you get a live feed, a scrolling list showing exactly which app just tried to phone home, which company received that data, and what category of tracker was involved, whether that's advertising, analytics, or something else entirely. To figure out what counts as a tracker, Tracker Control doesn't rely on just one source. It combines several respected block lists, including the same disconnect block list used inside Firefox, plus DuckDuckGo's Tracker Radar, built specifically for mobile apps, alongside its own in-house block list compiled from analyzing roughly 2 million apps. 2 million. That's not a guess. That's not a rumor. That's a database built from genuine, large-scale research into how tracking actually works across the entire app ecosystem. On top of that, it layers in the same tracker library signatures used by Exodus Privacy, so you're essentially getting both approaches working together at once, code-level analysis and live network monitoring, feeding off the same underlying research. The app is also upfront about something that matters a lot to me, which is what it does with your own data while it's busy exposing everyone else's. It doesn't use cookies, it doesn't send your personal information anywhere. The only things stored are a local database of the network connections it observes and your own settings, but stay on your device until you decide to clear them or uninstall the app entirely. It also touches briefly on your rights under data protection law, things like the GDPR in Europe, reminding you that companies collecting this kind of data are often legally obligated to disclose it, whether they make that easy to find or not. And here's where it gets genuinely useful, not just alarming. Once you can see the tracking happening, you can actually do something about it. Tracker Control lets you tap into any app on that list and see the individual tracking libraries running inside it, then flip them off one by one. Want to keep an app fully functional but stop it from feeding your behavior to an advertising network? You can do that. Want to block everything except the bare minimum needed for the app to even open? You can do that too. There's a small catch worth mentioning, honestly, because being upfront about the limitations matters just as much as being upfront about the discoveries here. Sometimes blocking too aggressively can break things. An app might crash, or images might fail to load if you accidentally cut off something the app actually needs to function. But that's a fixable problem. You just dial it back and try again. One important detail, because accuracy matters more than shock value here. If you grab Tracker Control straight from the Google Play Store, you're getting what's called the slim version. It'll still show you everything happening, all that eye-opening live data, but it won't let you actually block anything. That's not a limitation the developers chose. It's because Google restricts apps from blocking trackers inside other apps if they're distributed through the official Play Store. To get the full version, the one that actually lets you cut trackers off, you need to download it from F-Droid, which is an open source app repository, or directly from the official Tracker Control website. It sounds intimidating the first time you do it, downloading something outside the Play Store, but it's a completely standard, well-documented process. And thousands of privacy-conscious users do it every single day. And if you're someone who's technically inclined, who has a rooted Android device, and wants to go even further than just monitoring, there's another project worth knowing about called Warden. It was built by the same developer behind Aurora Store, and instead of just watching or blocking network traffic, Warden actually digs into the raw code files inside each installed app, looking for known tracker and logger class names, again cross-referenced against that same Exodus privacy database. It even has modes with names like debloater and nukit, which let Wayao disable or strip out tracker components directly from apps on your device. These are more experimental, more advanced, and they do require root access, so this isn't for casual users. But it shows just how deep this rabbit hole goes once you start pulling on the thread. What's worth noting is that not every logger flagged in a tool like Warden is automatically malicious. Some logging tools genuinely exist to help developers catch crashes and fix bugs faster, and that's a legitimate, even helpful purpose. But the same tool that maintains this list has also flagged a small number of more aggressive logging utilities capable of sending user activity data back to developers without any real, informed consent from the person using the app. The distinction matters, and it's exactly the kind of nuance that gets lost when people talk about tracking in broad, sweeping strokes instead of looking at the specifics case by case. So let's step back for a second, because I think it's worth asking the obvious question: why does any of this matter? Why should you care that some bike rental app has an analytics library buried inside it? Here's why. Stop and actually think about that for a moment before we move on. Every single one of these trackers exists to build a profile of you, not a vague anonymous statistic. You, specifically. What time you wake up, based on when you first open your phone. Where you go based on location pings from a mapping library you never knowingly agreed to activate. What you're interested in, based on which screens you linger on and which buttons you tap. Individually, each data point feels small, almost meaningless, but companies aren't collecting these pieces individually. They're stitching them together, app by app, tracker by tracker, into a shockingly detailed picture of your daily life, your habits, your movements, sometimes even your income bracket or your health concerns, all inferred from patterns you never consciously revealed to anyone. And the truly unsettling part is the sheer scale of it. This isn't one shady app doing this. It's not a handful of bad actors you can simply avoid by being careful. Multiple independent investigations using these exact open source tools keep finding the same thing over and over again across totally different categories of apps, social platforms, fitness trackers, local utility apps, even something as mundane as a bike sharing service. The pattern repeats constantly, category after category, device after device, because tracking has become the default business model baked into how modern apps get built and funded, not the rare exception you need to watch out for, and definitely not a problem limited to whichever single app happened to catch a headline this week. So what can you actually do about all this? First, and I really can't stress this enough, go download one of these tools yourself and run the scan. Seeing the raw list with your own eyes hits completely differently than hearing someone describe it to you secondhand. It's one thing to be told trackers exist. It's another thing entirely to scroll through your own installed apps and watch the numbers climb next to names you recognize. Second, and this is honestly the step most people skip, once you see the results, actually use them instead of just closing the app and moving on with your day. If an app you barely open is stacked with a dozen trackers, ask yourself honestly whether you even need it anymore. Delete the dead weight. For the apps you genuinely can't live without, look into whether tools like Tracker Control can selectively block the tracking libraries while keeping the core functionality completely intact. And where it makes sense, explore switching to leaner, privacy-respecting alternatives, many of which live on F-Droid, an entire repository built specifically around open source, tracker-light software created by developers who chose a completely different set of priorities. Third, and this one's less about action and more about mindset, stay skeptical of convenience. Every free app, every slick feature, every seamless little experience on your phone is paid for somehow. Sometimes that payment is money. Increasingly, that payment is you, your habits, your location, your attention, quietly harvested and sold in the background while you're just trying to unlock a bike or organize your home screen. I'm not saying panic and throw your phone in a lake. That's not realistic, and honestly, it's not even necessary. What I am saying is this. For years, this entire system relied on one simple thing to keep working smoothly, you never actually looking. The permissions pop-up was designed to feel like the whole story, when it was really just the cover page. Real transparency was always there for anyone willing to dig for it. Buried in code most people would never think to check. Think back to that bike rental app for a second, because I keep coming back to it, and I think it's the clearest example in this entire story. Nobody downloads an app to unlock a bicycle expecting it to be quietly studying their behavior patterns through something as elaborate as a dedicated profiling library. That's not what anyone signs up for when they tap install. And yet there it was, sitting right alongside a mapping tool and a crash reporter, completely invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look and had the right tool in hand to look with. If a small, niche, practical app can carry that much hidden machinery, it's worth asking. What's quietly running inside the handful of apps you open the most, the ones you'd never think to question because you use them every single day without a second thought? And that's really the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of this. Trust, when it comes to apps, has mostly been assumed rather than earned. We install something because a friend recommended it, because it has decent reviews, because the icon looks clean and the interface feels polished, and we just assume that whatever's happening behind the scenes is fine. for the most part, nobody ever checks. Nobody ever has a reason to check, because the tools to check simply weren't accessible or well known to everyday people until fairly recently. That's changing now, and it's changing fast, which is exactly why this story matters right now in this moment, and not just as some abstract, distant privacy debate reserved for tech experts. Now that door is wide open. These tools exist, they're free, they're open source, meaning anyone can inspect exactly how they work, and they only take a few short minutes of your time to actually run. The only real question left is whether you're actually going to look, or whether you're going to keep scrolling past it, the same way you have every single day up until right now. So here's my honest challenge to you, sitting there right now with your phone in your hand or your pocket. Don't just take my word for any of this. Go pull up one of these tools yourself tonight. Run the scan. Watch the list populate in real time. Look at the app you use the absolute most, the one you'd never suspect, the one that feels the most harmless out of everything installed on your device, and see what's actually hiding inside it. And I'd be willing to bet you find something that genuinely surprises you, the same way I did, the same way nearly everyone who tries this ends up doing. Because once you actually see, with your own eyes, how many trackers are hiding quietly inside the apps on your own phone, you genuinely cannot unsee it ever again. And maybe that's exactly the point. Maybe the entire system, quietly and deliberately, was built to count on you never actually looking in the first place. And the simple act of finally checking is the one single thing it was truly never designed to survive.